Recently, when Matthew Perry wrote a book and he did an interview circuit, now this guy's on Friends.
You know, your whole brain changes essentially when you're totally off of everything for a while. So I don't know how he would process that. I mean,
Before I saw the Matthew Perry interview with, I think, Diane Sawyer, and it made me think of Artie.
Right, so your DNA matters. Your physiology matters. There's some people like me, I'm lucky, right? Like, I drink alcohol, I go to sleep.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch. I'm your YouTube friend Brad, and again, this is sponsored by Massa's Restaurants in St. Louis. 5 locations, stlmassas.com is their website. Go there if you're driving through. Today our guest is Anthony Bozza, and as you saw in our little tease there, Artie Lange still hanging out there on Cameo. Not looking so great, but we'll talk to Anthony about that. He wrote 3 books with Artie Lange, including Too Fat to Fish and Crash and Burn. So we're going to talk about that experience and get some updates and just see what that was like. So if you enjoy Artie Lange, I think you'll enjoy today's show. Hello, Anthony. There you are. Thank you for joining me.
hi, Brad. How are you?
8-time New York Times best-selling author, Anthony. This is a first, I have to say. Congratulations on all your success.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You've spent time with Tommy Lee, Mick Fleetwood, Eminem. We're going to talk about all of them. But, of course, a lot of fans of this channel come to talk about Artie Lange and Howard Stern. And you wrote 3 books with Artie. How did you hook up with Artie? Just tell us how that became your guy and how you got involved with him, fortunately or unfortunately.
Hey, it's a little, with somebody like that, it's a little bit of both, you know what I mean? For sure. It's like, I wouldn't take it back. There's always things that you wish were different and that you hope would change. But, you know, Artie's the man. I mean, we hit #1 together. So all those other 7 people, whatever. And I hit the list myself too. But Artie we had an agent basically that was at ICM that I think in the second book we really took to task because he's not really a good guy. But we basically were at the same agency. You know, he wanted to do a book and that was it. We got hooked up together. Little funny story. I went to lunch with Artie and I was in a fender bender in a cab in New York City, like 4 days before. And I was like on my phone, like an idiot, like everyone else, and didn't have a seatbelt on in the back seat, which if you're a native New Yorker, you kind of don't do that. You're not going more than 20 miles an hour. Anyway, so I hit my head and, like a couple days later, I started getting like black eyes. Like I wasn't really hurt. I had a little lump. It was no big deal. But yeah, I had like black eyes happening. Like I looked like I was Alice Cooper and it was really bad. So I actually wore sunglasses to the meeting. It was at Del Frisco's after Artie like finished a show. And it was this agent, the publisher who wanted to buy the book and everybody. And I'm sitting there with sunglasses on. And by the end of it, like I just had to be like, guys, this is why these are on. And Artie told me afterwards that the whole time he was like, I love this guy. He's definitely on heroin. So that's what he thought. I was like totally a junkie.
Yeah,
So
you guys got together. Yeah, you get to become friendly just through his drug abuse, of course. Did you realize?
Yeah,
I mean,
that wouldn't have worked out.
No. Well, did you know of? Were you a Stern listener? Did you know of him? Were you a fan? And did you realize he was kind of off? Was he already? I mean, by the time you guys write that first book, he's already had his sleeping on the air and kind of talked about his heroin. So just tell me a little bit about the history of you knowing about him, and then were you understanding this is going to be a strange guy to work with?
Yeah, well, I grew up on Long Island, so I mean, I was a Stern guy for sure. That was like a huge part of my upbringing, and I totally knew about Artie, and I thought it was hilarious. And I really, I always had friends in school that were the ones that got in trouble. And it's kind of the same way with a lot of the more difficult yet super interesting people I've chosen to co-write with. I guess I just like that kind of crap. So, I knew what the issues might be and stuff like that. But, I had like basically lived with Tommy Lee. I'd written with Slash. So I kind of knew a bit of that. And Artie's just so damn funny. I wanted to do it. So charming. And we had a lot in common, but being like Italian American and stuff like that. So I wasn't worried about that. And also, we did Too Fat to Fish. This is deep in the period for everyone who's read all the books and knows the Artie lore. This is the period where he was most together with the lying and the like keeping it together, yet doing shit on the sly. So that was the best period, and there were definitely, moments where I knew what was going on, but Artie wasn't going to admit anything. And I was just there to make the best book possible. So have some fun too, always. But, yeah.
Yeah, I teased this episode with a little bit of his cameo page. I don't know if you've talked to him of late. Tell me any communications. Do you keep in touch with him? If you do, how is he? The cameo page makes me a little scared.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Artie in a minute. Not since the pandemic. I keep tabs on him through people. Artie's tough. Yeah, it's like we had like just a little bit of a falling out over some bullshit. And on the third book that we did, he was, he was really not in a good way, but he really screwed the pooch in a lot of ways with the book release and promotion and all that stuff, which was frustrating, but part of the territory. I'm not annoyed about that at all. All is forgiven. I love Artie, but no, I haven't talked to him in a minute. Yeah. But like I said, I know I talk to someone who does keep in touch pretty regularly. So I guess it's time. I'd like to talk to him again. I hope he's doing okay. The stuff I've seen make me sad.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know when you wrote the third book, was the nose issue already happening? Did you get to deal with him at that period of time? Because everyone's curious about that period of time because we didn't hear him on the show. So all we had to do was see his Twitter and possibly a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the second book, Crash and Burn, dealt with like the 2 years after Stern and like severe depression and getting cleanish. And then he sort of, was set up for this great comeback essentially, with Crashing and all this stuff with Judd Apatow and everything. The nose thing was, again, I was there for the nose. The nose was in the nose, the Dick Tracy nose, I like to call it, was definitely in existence during when we did Want to Bet, the last book. So that was an issue, and he just listen, you can't make someone do something, they're not going to do. As he always said on the show, Artie's going to do what Artie's going to do. So yeah, the nose was happening, and things just got worse. The pandemic was really hard on him, and but he is finally sober now, from everything I hear and from everything I can kind of see, and a changed person, I think, after all the years of abuse. But I don't know, man. It's a sad situation.
What was it like to document him, stabbing himself? That was sort of the weirdest moment because I was a huge fan and a listener, and I really thought, man, if Artie leaves, I won't probably listen to this show. I really don't. I mean, I don't find it as entertaining as it was with him, but I felt just terrible. What was it like to hear that news in your own personal, and then when you recounted with him, what was it like to see him kind of discuss? Because I just went back and I read this part because it's just so crazy that he does talk about it in great detail, but clearly just out of it, right? I mean, just stabbing himself, he had no idea what he was doing.
You hear this a lot from addicts and stuff. He relapsed and had so much shame about it that he just didn't want to be there. So he was like, stick from the drugs and the shame, and the whole thing sort of came together, and he was out of it. I mean, he drank bleach, you know what I'm saying? And he knew that there was an intervention. I think he knew, or his mom was coming over. I don't think he knew that it was going to be a full intervention with everybody. I'm glad it was, because walking into that would be really hard on anyone to A, deal with quickly and efficiently, and B, the psychological and emotional effects, right, of his poor mother. The thing about Artie that was always great is that he let me go really detailed. I like to kind of really make whatever I write try to come off the page as much as possible for people, even if it's gross. So, for example, like the pig and shit chapter, that's the big was on Stern. He gave me an audio of that. That was kind of how I earned his trust, actually, very early in the Too Fat to Fish process. He gave me the audio of that from on the air and was like, let's see what you do with this. And I wrote the chapter that I wrote that essentially is the way it is. Just went as detailed as possible, like every micro detail. And that was kind of it. So he knew that, as difficult as it was to actually write, because I have, this guy is my friend, I care about him. I wanted to do that for that scene as well. And, he gave me the material to do it. He's just, the thing about him is when we would go over the more difficult or just desperate or ridiculous things he had done, he doesn't shy away from the details. So he would be brave about that. And it was like he was talking about somebody else, which, in some ways it is, you know, you're that messed up. But he never in any of the books did he have like, I mean, he does have shame, but he didn't shy away from the reality of the most sort of the lowest points of his life.
Yeah, how
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what we went for.
I was going to say, how do you construct these with him? You know, especially like I said, Crash and Burn is I mean, they're great. Both of them are great, but obviously this one gives you more detail, kind of the background. Okay, he knew what he was doing, because you always wondered, like, what was it like trying to kind of craft a book with him, and how do you sort of sit with him? Do you come up with sort of the chapter ideas? Does he kind of just give me the kind of that semantics of that with him?
Sure. Well, Artie, you know, he's a great storyteller, as anyone who's listened to the Stern Show when he was on it, which, by the way, I agree with you. Not the same show without him. And it hasn't been, and Howard's kind of turned a corner, still like one of the greatest interviewers of our lifetime. But anyway, just wanted to agree with you there. You know, he always had a really good sense of what makes a good story and which elements of his life, you know, he wanted to talk about. So more so than, you know, some of the musicians that I'd work with who don't really think in like necessarily like a linear or a textual sense. Artie kind of had that from just being on the air and doing stand-up. So him telling stories were always great. And there was always, I would kind of go there. I mean, this changed for different times, but the general thing is that we'd get together. He would have some ideas. He would like kind of send them to me, you know, or give me like a notebook with ideas. And we would kind of do sessions where we'd go over certain stories. A lot of times he would just like kind of take the tape recorder and almost like he was doing stand up, like walk around the apartment and shit. And I'd be sitting there and asking follow-up questions. So I'd get like the loose framework from him. Then I would kind of go in and write it, send it to him with questions or with like, you know, jokes, like this is my attempt at a joke. I know you got a better one. And sometimes some of the greatest parts is where Artie was like, that joke's awesome. It stays. And I was like, oh, I'm making him laugh. Yes. So that's kind of how it worked. It would be like, you know, it started to become Too Fat to Fish was obviously like his just autobiography. Right. And then after that, it became everything that happened next, you know? So the structure more became like, you know, his life just got darker and stranger. So that became the structure. Too Fat to Fish was a collection of stories, and I sort of arranged it more like chronologically or asked about different periods of time. But it always kind of fired a wonderful narrative. Like he was just in a better place when he wrote that. So I think he was, yeah, his comedic chops were up. He was on the radio every day, even though he was like falling asleep on the air. He was still killing it. Like anyone who saw him doing stand-up during that period, he was amazing. So it was like throwing material at somebody at the top of their game. It was easier then. The other times were, you know, same process. When Artie would be in a bad place or when we were discussing something that was really hard for him, he started not even wanting to meet. So he would like, he bought a couple of the same recorders that I use for interviews and would do them alone in his house. Some of those recordings are definitely pretty messed up. And then send them to me and I would have it like, you know, I transcribe it and then I get in and edit it and do my thing. So that's kind of how it went. He liked the writing process, you know, he like wrote a couple things, but mostly it was like I said, almost like a stand-up routine, oral, recorded. And then I would take it from there, build it up, send it back to him. He would make some changes, make it better. And then that's it.
I'm not an addict. I don't know if you are. I don't want to get into your background, but I just don't. I just in my head, I think it really hit home. Honestly, just recently when Matthew Perry wrote a book and he did an interview circuit. Now this guy's on Friends, and he's coming drunk and drugged, and just the way he described all of it took me back to sort of Artie thinking, okay, because in my head I'm like, how is Artie blowing all of these opportunities, going on Stern and Letterman and Conan, and he's on the Joe Buck. Why is he fucking this up all the time? And then after watching,
myself that.
Yeah, and then I watched the Matthew Perry thing. I'm like, Matthew Perry had way more to lose. He's on a giant show, and it made me sort of understand the whole thing. So watching Dark Side of the Comedy on Vice, you were part of that. I thought you were great, along with a lot of people that had been on this show. Do you think Artie would like that show? Do you think he was proud that he was one of the 10 selected? And thoughts on just what his mindset would be if he saw that show?
Man, I don't know where his head's at. He has been sober, and I'm not, but people very close to me are addicts, are sober, and can always like point out a lot of the psychology involved. And your whole brain changes essentially when you're totally off of everything for a while. So I don't know how he would process that. I mean, when I did that interview, I got very emotional, and just like missed him, and wanted it. I hope that he would see it. You always hope that like something you do or say is going to affect a person like that, and maybe help them make a change to just stay around. That's all you can, that's all you can do. Because like, you can send them to rehab as many times as you want. If they don't want to do the work, they're not going to do the work. And obviously substances, the Matthew Perry book was gnarly, and he's somebody that seems very angry still. But I like that he was so real about just how much it controls you, and just how repetitive it gets, like that is the thing that you care about more than anything else. Nothing else matters. Just want to like go get high and get fucked up.
He mentions too, and that the getting off of it is the hardest part, because you feel so good, and now you've got this base of feeling this way, and when you don't have it, now you're not medicated, and this is a 2-week thing, a struggle. So of course, why would you want to feel like shit for 2 weeks if you're going to feel this way? It did finally. I mean, maybe you wrote about it. Maybe maybe I'm just naive, but it really was. I think it was a Diane Sawyer interview or something. But it was very okay. I understand now. When you are that famous, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter at all. If anything, the fame, and Artie says this in the books a couple of times, that he didn't become an opiate addict until he was rich, and he's glad for that. So the fame, if anything, gives you more passes. Like, you can get away with more shit. Hollywood loves a comeback, but eventually they don't. I think that's what happened to art, to be honest. But I think that the fame makes you feel even more invincible. Or, like, you could just go to a fancy rehab again and clean out before you have to do a project. I think it gives you more excuses.
What did you think of how Howard handled that the last 3 or 4 years? It just, the sleeping on the air became a bit, and he played stupid, as did Robin, as did Fred, and I think finally at the end, obviously they fired him before the end of 2009, but what were your thoughts? It was great radio, it was funny, but at some point you have to really check yourself and go, what are we doing here, right? I mean, what did you think of the way Orlando Jones said it was enabling? Give me your thoughts on just what you heard during...
I agree with Orlando. I totally agree with Orlando. When they were, couldn't be more thankful to have my book that I wrote with him, like, promoted so well for 6 months straight. You know what I mean? Like, they made it a thing. It was like its own bit. It was like, let's talk about this part of the book and all that stuff. That was fantastic. But a lot of it was painful for me to listen to. I listened to all of it, but knowing what he had been through and knowing that he was teetering a little bit, I thought it was too much. Like, I agree with Orlando. I don't think it helped. I think it probably made it seem, it made it into a bit for him. It made it into the thing that people it made him, I think, these are the things that people like about you. I think it almost like that's probably the message that he was getting, like, this is what people want. Stories about you being fucked up. That's going to make you want to go get fucked up. It just is, It's like, if you're an alcoholic, shouldn't go, I don't know, wine tasting for 2 weeks, like with people who are wine tasting, something like that. I don't know if I'm making a good enough metaphor, but I think that it was hard to listen to. They were making light of a situation that is certainly funny because it's Artie. He makes waking up in your own shit funny. But it's really not underneath that. So I totally agree that it was a little too celebrated and definitely enabling and in a way making light of it, if that makes sense, too.
Well, and he fought everybody on the show, too. He fought Teddy, he fought Sal, he fought Richard and Gary, and Howard loved it as a bit, right? And unfortunately, it was interesting radio. I'll have to say, I did enjoy it myself.
Oh, it was great radio. It was car crash. Couldn't look away. You know, it was really great radio, but it did take a toll, you know.
I didn't, and the last thing from the Dark Side showed the cable over his bed. Would that come up in the books? I don't remember seeing or hearing about that, but I think Tim Sabian or somebody wrote about going to his room and there was a cable that his dad, you know, reminding him of his father. And I think he, in essence, tries to kind of take all of the things that have happened or people have told him. You know, your father, you know, falling and becoming quadriplegic and you not being there, you usually hold the ladder. A lot of people try to be some, you know, psychologists. Dr. Drew would come in.
Right.
Was that,
right.
Did you guys get into I know there was a ton of father stuff, but I mean, the cable over the thing, do you think he really believes that this is why he's so messed up is because of that moment?
I mean, it's something to hang it on. That's for sure. I don't know. I didn't see the cable in the room. I don't know when that was put up or whatnot. We didn't talk about that in any of the books, but, I don't know. You know, there's no doubt that it probably accelerated his addiction. He was already sort of like using and you know, was working construction and regularly like drinking and, you know, doing coke and stuff like that. Any kind of tragedy in an addict's life is going to accelerate their use for sure. But sometimes I feel that, you know, it was something that he always leaned on.
Yeah.
It can't just be that one, like all these years later, you know, if you want to like come to peace with it, you got to do some therapy or figure something out. It can't just be that convenient that like, this is the reason why I do all this. It's like 30 years later, man, you know? So, but it's an easy thing to hang it all on that doesn't have him involved, you know?
No,
So.
I mean, he's an interesting guy. You know, you know, I've met him a few times. Nice guy. Probably was messed up when he came through St. Louis. He talks about times when you know, cheeseburgers were thrown at him. I don't think I did that, but well, let's talk Artie first because I have a, you know, you did the Artie and Mike kind of summit there, but you did, I think, talk to Artie kind of off camera too. Clearly, I don't know. Do you talk to him at all? What is your relationship? Have you had any conversations?
I haven't talked to him for a while. I should reach out to him actually and see what he's been up to, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, there's a guy who he's so talented, uses humor as a defense, right? As so many comedians do, use humor as a way to deflect the pain. But I'm good at sort of listening and saying, all right, no, that's really funny about your dad falling off the roof, but not, right? Because now maybe you'll tell me what that really meant for you and the family and the rest of it. And so that's why I'm not invited so much to like gatherings because people are like, well, who do we sit him next to? Like, who do we want to leave in tears? Because I tend to burrow for the truth. And, you know, the things that connect people are more often than not about trouble, right? Like I used to open my talk show this way every time. I would talk to the live studio audience and I'd say, listen, here's the thing. What you're going to see unfold as we tape the show is about the truth. And there's nothing to fear here. In fact, it's going to connect you not only with the people whose stories you hear, but with each other, because you're in the presence of the truth about their lives coming out. And I would make the point, you know, if we all went around the room, 120 of you and me, and read from the top lines of our resumes about all the things we've achieved, we'd leave the room strangers. We might even envy one another. There'd be some maybe ill will. If, on the other hand, everyone were to stand up and say, you know, this is the one thing that causes me a lot of discomfort and pain. Everybody in the room is suddenly linked. And you'd almost go to war with those people because you're like, look, I know this person. So that's what I tried to do live with the Stern folks. And it's fun. And there were some serious moments. Howard got choked up a couple times.
Yeah. With Artie, I mean, you know, I think I was talking to his author a couple months ago because he spent a lot of time with him as well. And I got into this thought of where I saw the Matthew Perry interview with, I think, Diane Sawyer. And it made me think of Artie because, like, he's just an addict, but we got to hear him every day. With Matthew Perry, he did his scenes, got off, did whatever he did, drank. Is that pretty much correct what I'm thinking? Is that once you become an addict, it's just that hard to come off? And that way, can you sort of look? I mean, he always tries to say the activating event is his father falling off the roof. When you look at that, is that what you think when you think of Artie? Is like, okay, if that's what he thinks, then I'm always curious because it seems like he likes to use that sort of as a crutch. It's a terrible, obviously, moment in his life. But do you think as a doctor that opens up addiction, or is it just that's a sickness? Because that's what I saw with Matthew Perry. The guy was sick. He couldn't stop drinking.
Right. So I think everything matters, right? So your DNA matters. Your physiology matters. There's some people like me, I'm lucky, right? Like I drink alcohol, I go to sleep. I get no euphoria. I'm physiologically immune to becoming alcoholic. Artie's not, obviously. However, would I take it as gospel when he says, look, this trouble in my life took off when my father fell off the roof? Well, there's got to be more to the story, you'd say, if you're an investigative journalist, which I used to be, or a psychiatrist, which I spent so many years doing, because for some people, they'd say, wow, well, I did see my dad continue to live his life. I mean, even with this profound injury, he continued to be a dad. Or you can't break me might be another lesson. So the fact that he identifies that, great, that's really important. What do you think about all of that? But then there's more, because you'd want to dig more deeply and figure out, well, what do you think about that event? And how was he before that event toward you as a person? And how was he afterwards? How was your mother's relationship with him before it, after it? What were your hopes for him? You're a broken guy, Artie. What are your hopes for yourself? Right. So in other words, to try to figure out, is this laced into his DNA, this tendency toward substances, or is it also that you'd want to say, well, look, what does it mean to you if you weren't impaired? Does that mean you've broken ranks with your dad? That you've gotten up out of the wheelchair and that doesn't feel right because he never did? So I start really processing things with people. And why? To find the narrative that feels like the truth, because people have a remarkable capacity when they are possessed of that, when they say, yes, that's my story. They do pretty well. They don't run from it necessarily. They're like, okay, fair enough. Now I can build better because I can see what really happened in my life. Too many people live their lives. I use an analogy, like if you tried to read a book and the pages in the middle were glued together, say the middle 150 pages, and someone said, that's okay, just read the first 50 and the last 100 and you write the ending. You'd say, I don't know. I want to get into those glued together pages, but most people don't. And they really need to, because otherwise, what do you feel? A sense of desperation, sort of depersonalization. I don't know this person. Yeah, that's you. That's a problem because it leads to anxiety. It might make you want to drink. For instance, I'm not saying anything about Artie, but if you were a person who was wishing because you didn't like your dad, okay, or there was friction, and you were half wishing, I wish the guy would fall off the roof for God's sake, then he does. That's a different problem, right, than if you had this incredibly loving relationship and your dad was injured so severely. It's still quite different because you might beat yourself up for the rest of your life unless someone intervenes to help you out. If you had this unconscious wish and you think, I probably caused it with my wish, but you might not even remember that. That's my spiel.
That's deep. I don't know if you follow him.
That's pretty deep.
That is deep. I don't know if you follow him now or see what he's up to, but he comes on social media, then he goes away. He'll start up a podcast. Just professional opinion. Where do you think he is? Like, how do you think he's doing? Everyone you talk to, like I said, I talked to his author. I talked to his buddy that was with part of Beer League. They all say, hey, he's trying to work on himself and stay out of this thing, so.
That's all you can do. I mean, I don't know how he's doing, but, I always think, like, broken people are pretty good stocks to buy, right? Because the comeback we all understand the comeback. Everyone loves a comeback. So if he were my client now, or I were sitting with him over coffee, I'd say, look, the only question is, what's it going to look like? Right. So what is your it's got to be bigger than what you were doing before. What's it going to be? And make sure you love it. Right. Because, there are people, that book Open by Andre Agassi, like, he didn't even want to be a tennis player. It was an accident that he was good at it, and his parents pushed him to do it. And so he had sort of an Achilles heel, which is, I'm really good at that, and they want me to do it. So he ended up doing it. But what you got to get to the core of who you really are and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So you came in for a Howard and Beth session very early on. They weren't even married yet. I watched all of these, by the way, just to kind of research and
cool.
to look back. They're all on YouTube, so you can check them out. Beth looks like a prisoner then, and I don't know if you're listening to the show, but just this week she sounds like a prisoner now because Howard is afraid of COVID. Beth wants to go out, and it's sort of the same dynamic they had before they were married, according to this. When I came away from watching this, because, again, I hadn't heard it in 10 years, 50, whatever it was, but Beth was just like, yes, Howard, whatever you want to do, Howard. I love you, Howard. I'm into whatever you want to do. That's what I got out of it. How was it for you to kind of be in there? Because, that could have been ugly. Turned out okay, and they're still together, so I'm quite interested by all that. But just that whole kind of dynamic with them.
Yeah, they're still together, which is, good data that there was a good reason to get married and to be together to begin with. When I talked to Howard, one of the things we talked about was this carpet. I remember that in one of their rooms, and she had picked it out. The only thing she had picked out in the whole apartment. Right. And he just wouldn't not wear shoes walking on the white carpet. It's the one thing. Right. But those things have meaning. And so when you say prisoner, it's like, well, what's a prisoner? A prisoner is somebody who doesn't really have any rights or authority. And that's when he got choked up. When I said, listen, I think she might actually love you a lot. And at some point, you're going to have to take the opportunity to kind of share a little authority to some extent and invite her to be present, right? The white carpet, you're trying to kill her. You're basically like, you know what? You picked out the white carpet. That's exactly where I'm going to leave dirt marks because you don't exist in some ways in this place. So hopefully there's more space for her now, except the COVID thing is like, listen, dude, if you've got anxiety and OCD, it's on you. You got to treat it. You can't expect that other people are going to share your OCD and cater to it because that's not even a favor to you. Right. So there you go.
Are you listening at all these days? Because this was just fresh out of this week's. And I kind of put updates in here for people that just hear the show. I'm not real entertained by it as much, but people seem to like to hear what's going on. Have you heard any of this stuff? I'm just curious if you've had any contact with Howard in the last 10, 15.
I'll be so listen, I have a particular point of disagreement with Howard that led to my being on less frequently, which was Chaz Bono. Right. So I think it was, I don't know if he called me or if it was, I think it was a radio interview, but it wasn't videotaped. But basically it was when I said, listen, it's probably not the best idea to watch Chaz Bono on Dancing with the Stars for kids because they might decide that's me. I want to change my gender. And he said, Dr. Abelo, do you really believe that watching that could lead to someone making that decision? And I said, yeah, kind of. Right. And so because adulation heaped upon somebody who, to me, it's more of a psychological problem than a choice. Hey, not everyone agrees with me. I know that. And he didn't vehemently. And that kind of fractured my appearances on the show. But I'd be happy to go back and discuss it with him now that, it's become something of a phenomenon in the world and maybe not all to the good.
Yeah, well, I think once your opinion is not the same as his, you're not welcome, correct?
Yeah. Exactly, but I could help him to see where he's wrong. So that could be fun.
Are you listening at all? Have you heard any of the last couple years?
Intermittently, I tune in, and I think he's so supremely talented that I enjoy it still. And I'm sure, tons of people still do. And so, yeah, I mean, he had sort of perhaps, his extraordinary heyday. And as you said, maybe the energy is a little less. But nonetheless, I mean, he's a genius.